Europeans have America. So until the late 18th century, indentured servitude was common in the British America. It was often a way for Europeans to migrate to the American colonies. They signed an indenture to return for a costly passage. However, the system was also used to exploit many of them, as well as Asians, mostly from India and China, who wanted to migrate to the New World. These Asian people were used mainly to construct roads and railways systems. After their indenture expired, the immigrants were free to work for themselves or another employer. At least one economist has suggested that indentured servitude was an economic arrangement designed to iron out imperfections in the capital market. So there was pros and cons to this, and it really determines or depends on who you were, and it came down to this. Between one half and two-thirds of European immigrants to the American colonies between the 1630s and the American Revolution came under indentures. However, while most half the European immigrants to the 13 colonies were indentured servants, at any one time they were outnumbered by workers who had never been indentured or whose indenture had expired, and thus free wage labor was the more prevalent for Europeans in the colonies. Slavery. That's what it said. Indentured people were numerically important mostly in the region from Virginia north to New Jersey. Other colonies saw far fewer of them. The total number of European immigrants to all 13 colonies before 1775 was about 500,000. Of these, 55,000 were involuntary prisoners. All right, 55,000 involuntary prisoners. So take that for what it is. Of the 450,000 or so European arrivals who came voluntarily, Tomlin estimates that 48% were indentured. About 75% of these were under the age of 25. The age of adulthood for men was 24 years, not 21. Those over 24 generally came on contracts lasting about 3 years. Regarding the children who came, Gary Nash reports that many of the servants were nephews, nieces, cousins, and children of friends of immigrating Englishmen who paid their passage in return for their labor once in America. Pause. So once again, a lot of the indentured servants, as they say, were actually family members. These weren't all just random, off the block, Joe Schmoes. These were people that they knew, because these were folks who wanted to, A, they wanted to have a new life, and then B, you wanted to bring people who had the ability to do what was needed based off of their skill set. And most of the time, those who had the skills that you needed probably were going to be those inside your family, But they still had to pay their way. So, because these ships, they had to get endorsed to be able to do these ventures. And, they had to pay. All right. So how were they going to get paid? Especially if you couldn't pay. Well, you paid an indenture. You're talking about you'll work for a certain amount of years to pay that way to come over, and technically what they're doing in the case is they're getting credit in the sense of being able to bring you on over. So you utilize that sense of your sweat equity, because that's technically it is. So your sweat equity in exchange for you to be able to come over. And that's not everyone. I just had to put that out there. That's not for everyone. All right, so it says several instances. This is where we now start getting to the exception. Several instances of kidnapping for transportation to the Americas are recorded, such as that of Peter Williamson, 1730 to 1799. Historian Richard Hofstadter pointed out that although efforts were made to regulate or check their activities, they diminished in importance in the 18th century, it remains true that a certain small part of the European colonial population of America was brought by force, and a much larger portion came in response to deceit and misrepresentation on the part of the spirits, the recruiting agents. I spoke about the spirits earlier. One spirit named William Thien was known to have spirited away 840 people from Britain to the colonies in a single year. Historian Lerone Bennett Jr. notes that masters given to flogging often did not care whether their victims were black or white. Pause. So we already understand, especially during this time in history, when we're talking about the transatlantic slave trade, who were those folks who they constituted as being slaves. But people didn't know that it were also those who also the opposite complexion of you who were also considered slaves during this time too. Slavery was not just a one person in sense of race type of ordeal. It was a business. So it was whoever they felt fit based off of, what was needed for that enterprise or that monopoly at that time. And human trafficking was a big business at this moment. All right. So most folks, like they say, either if you wanted indentured servants were family members most of the time, and then all of them weren't family members. Like we said, there's an exception. And then you have those, in that case, who were kidnapped because of the spirits. The spirits were known as the recruiting agents, who were just pretty much taking folks from various places, and we're mostly talking about the indentured servants in the British Isles. So we're just going to have to say, that's the territory that they're talking about, where they're coming from. All right. So also during the 18th and early 19th centuries, children from the UK were often kidnapped and sold into indentured labor in the American and Caribbean colonies, often without any legal process or contract of indenture. Pause. So I just spoke about that in regards to, you had children that was coming from the United Kingdom. They didn't call it the UK at this time. It was called Great Britain or the British Isles. And like they said, they were sold into indentured labor or slavery. Now, who was the people that we most likely all the time hear about being sold into slavery? Those of you who have been called, quote unquote, black people. But now that you've seen, based off of the truth that's all been coming out for the various years, is that these nations didn't have just a so-called one complexion type of person or individual. Many of them were just various nations just mixed up, because people weren't known based off of their race at these times. They were known based off of the family or the nation you come from. Once again, you were known as the family or the nation you come from. And that's what we have to return back to. You need to start understanding people based off of the family they come from or the nation they come from. Stop looking at people based off of their skin color, because if you do that, you're always going to end up shooting yourself in the foot, for the lack of a better way to explain that. Indentured servants could not marry without the permission of their master. They were frequently subject to physical punishment and did not receive legal favor from the courts. Female indentured servants, in particular, might be raped and or sexually abused by their masters. If children were produced, the labor would be extended by 2 years. Pause. So it's crazy, like I said, how they'll rape you, you'll have their babies, and then they'll extend your contract for 2 years. And then that child, the baby, didn't have any rights either. So it's just asinine, like I said, how history happened or what happened, and what effects we're still suffering from that. The American Revolution severely limited immigration to the United States, but economic historians dispute its long-term impact. Sharon Salinger argues that the economic crisis that followed the war made long-term labor contracts unattractive. Her analysis of Philadelphia's population shows that the percentage of bound citizens fell from 17% to 6.4% throughout the war. William Miller posits a more moderate theory, stating that the revolution wrought disturbances upon white servitude, but these were temporary rather than lasting. David Gallinson supports this theory by proposing that the numbers of British indentured servants never recovered and that Europeans of other nationalities replaced them. Pause. And that is absolutely right. You did have people from various other nations to start actually replacing those indentured servants. Especially many of them were transitioning to what we call chattel slavery. All right. Indentured servitude began its decline at the Bacon's Rebellion, a servant uprising against the government of colonial Virginia. This was due to multiple factors such as the treatment of servants, the government's refusal to expel native tribes from the surrounding area, refusal to expand the amount of land an indentured servant could work by the colonial government, and inequality between the upper and lower class in colonial society. Indentured servitude was the primary source of labor for early American colonists until the rebellion. Little changed in the immediate aftermath of Bacon's Rebellion. However, the rebellion did cause a general distrust of servant labor and a fear of future rebellion. Exactly. That's the reason why they start transitioning over to, once again, to chattel slavery. Um, because indentured servants had rights. They was under contracts. And then in this case, they didn't want to have these type of ordeals of a rebellion happening. The fear of indentured servitude eventually cemented itself into the hearts of Americans, leading towards the reliance on enslaved Africans. All right, so what they did is, yeah, they may have had a few folks who came over, who came from the continent we call Africa, but because the majority of the people who was already here, and I'm not talking about the indigenous people here, but I'm talking about the ones who they brought over from the British Isles, from Ireland, England, Scotland, Wales, whatever. They brought over here to the, or they brought themselves over. However, they came over. They was here, and the slave catchers were just still, like, even folks who were free, they were putting them in bondage and chattel slavery, because once again, chattel slavery was a hot commodity. So a lot of indentured servants end up finding themselves back in bondage, and this time in perpetual bondage. All right, they want to operate underneath the 4 to 7 year rule, which technically is a biblical rule. After 7 years, all of your debt's supposed to be exonerated. The Americans and British governments passed several laws to help foster the decline of indentures. The UK Parliament's Passenger Vessels Act of 1803 regulated travel conditions aboard ships to make transportation more expensive and to hinder landlords' tenants seeking a better life. An American law passed in 1833 abolished the imprisonment of debtors, which made prosecuting runaway servants more difficult, increasing the risk of indentured contract purchases. The 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, passed in the wake of the American Civil War, made involuntary indentured servitude illegal in the United States, except for imprisonment, such as in for-profit prisons. Pause. And we just heard a case recently from a brother who they end up pretty much giving life to, and said that they can utilize his sweat equity in exchange of, deleting him by the state underneath federal under federal law, excuse me. So that lets you know that how they was operating back then is, in essence, is still operating today. The problem is you have been glossed over in regards to how things been happening for so long because of your modern day reality of, you've been given a little bit more privileges and freedoms, but the infrastructure regarding how you came to be is still there. That didn't change. All right. And then, so once again, this is indentured servitude. I'm going to probably read a little bit more, and then we're going to go ahead and move forward. So, the Caribbean. In 1643, the European population of Barbados was 37,200, which is 86% of the population. During the wars of the Three Kingdoms, at least 10,000 Irish and some Scottish and English prisoners of war were transported as indentured laborers to the colonies. Approximately 500,000 Europeans immigrated as indentured servants to the Caribbean, primarily the English-speaking islands of the Caribbean before 1840. Pause. All right, so if they're telling you that these are the folks who were sent to the Caribbean at the time, and we already know who predominantly how the people look in the Caribbean, then we can already rest assured that the same folks, how they look, that they sent down to the Caribbean, had to have looked the same type of way, the same way as the ones who they sent here to the mainland. And yes, they did send the same people from Scotland, England, and Ireland here to the mainland, mostly here into the territory what we call the 13 colonies or the Eastern Seaboard. And you'll know, that's why we keep telling you, do your genealogy. Do your genealogy. In 1838, with the abolition of slavery at its onset, the British were in the process of transporting 1 million Indians out of India and into the Caribbean to take the place of the recently freed Africans, freed in 1833 in indentureship. Pause. All right, so they're literally taking, and this is why I'm telling like our India brothers over there, and so India brothers and sisters over there, how they are actually truly related to us, going back to an ancient common stock that, unfortunately they don't talk about. And I'm not even talking about no so-called Africa, so we gotta not think of it that way. But they use Africa in the sense of the terms because of the history of the Berbers. It encompasses all of those people in the territory that we call North Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, as well the British Isles. And then we can go into the ancient history, going up to the ancient steppe people, which would be known as the ancient Scythians or Scythians, which you will say the ancient Indo-Iranians will all technically be related to it. That will actually also too tie into what we call the ancient Celt or Celtic culture, which once again ties into all of this information that we're talking about as well. All right. So it says in so when women looking for what they believe will be a better life in the colonies were specifically sought after and recruited at a much higher rate than men due to the high population of men already in the colonies. Women had to prove their status as single and eligible to immigrate, as married women could not leave without their husbands. Many women seeking escape from abusive relationships were willing to take that chance. The Indian Immigration Act of 1883 prevented women from exiting India as widowed or single in order to escape. Arrival in the colonies brought unexpected conditions of poverty, homelessness, and little to no food as the high numbers of immigrants overwhelmed the small villages and flooded the labor market. Many were forced into signing labor contracts that exposed them to the hard field labor on the plantation. Additionally, on arrival to the plantation, single women were assigned a man as they were not allowed to live alone. The subtle differences between slavery and indentureship is best seen here, as women were still subjected to the control of the plantation owners as well as their newly assigned partners. Indentured servitude of Irish and other European peoples occurred in 17th century Barbados, and it was fundamentally different from enslavement. An enslaved African's body was owned, as were the bodies of their children, while the labor of indentured servants was under the contractual ownership of another person. Laws and racial hierarchy would allow for the indentured and slaves to be treated differently, as well as their identities to be defined differently. Barbados is an example of a colony in which the separation between enslaved Africans and servants was codified into law. Distinct legal acts were created in 1661, treating each party as a separate group. Pause. So this is why I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, that back then, your status, your position, the group you were coming from had nothing to do with your so-called skin tone. Unfortunately today, because you got to remember the Racial Integrity Act, and I think all of the stuff was done underneath Walter Plecker and them and all that jazz, when they try to consolidate you all into one category. And when they consolidated you into that one category, they just did it based off of your skin complexion. Like I said, they all look black based off of the way we're going to identify you. So that's what it is. All right, check that, check that, check that. Taking them going to the one drop. If you had one drop of what they thought, quote unquote, was black blood, they're going to put you in there. And they felt that this was you based off of the skin complexion. So, but back then, before all of that, before the 1783 Treaty of Paris and going all the way back further, before 1600s, they notated you based off of where you came from, like I said, your nation or your nationality, and then you separated based off of what group what you were going to be doing. If you was an indentured servant, if you was so-called a slave, if you was a free man, however, and it didn't matter what your so-called skin complexion were. Like I said, all of you can all have the same complexion, all be underneath different statuses. See what I'm saying? You all could have came from the same nation and all been under different so-called statuses. All right, let's continue. The British ruling class anxieties over Irish loyalties would lead to harsh policing of Irish servants' movements, for instance, needing reason to leave the plantations from which they were employed. Similarly, the laws regarding slavery would prevent enslaved Africans from doing the same, while enslaved Africans and for a period free Africans were not allowed to use the court system in any manner, even to act as a witness. Barbados would allow white servants to go to court if they felt that they had received poor treatment. Additionally, children of African descent were offered no supplementary protection. while children of English, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh extraction who were sent to Barbados as indentured servants could not work without a parent's consent. That's almost like a work permit today for like our teenage children. Such differences in social classes will ensure that alliances between the two groups will not lead to revolts towards plantation owners and managers. As well, during periods of mass indentured servitude of Irish peoples in the Caribbean, certain Irish individuals will use enslaved labor to profit financially and climb the ladder of social class. Historians Christian Block and Jenny Shaw write that the Irish, by virtue of their European heritage, gained greater social and economic mobility. An example is a former indentured servant in Barbados, Cornelius Bryan, would go on to own land and enslaved people himself, demonstrating the tiers between servant and slave classes. And once again, like I told you, that those servants and slaves can all still have came from the same nation, same kingdom, and still all been the same complexion. It was just depending on, like I said, who you were and what was going on at this time and why you was in the position that you were in. All right. And now we're going to go, since we're talking mostly about the Irish, which is the most important part of this bill, but also too for those English and Scottish, or the descendants, we would like to say, that Great Britain or the British Isles. This is still good for you as well, because we're talking about the indentured servants or indentured servitude, and indentured servitude was taking place in where? The plantations. So you need to understand what the plantations are, what they mean in the history. All right, because we're going to start finding out the origin of plantations, and you know who was the first ones who are actually the occupiers of them or the settlers of them. All right, plantation also means settlement or colony. In the history of colonialism, a plantation was a form of colonization in which settlers would establish permanent or semi-permanent colonial settlements in a new region. The term first appeared in the 1580s in the English language to describe the process of colonization, before being also used to refer to a colony by the 1610s. All right, pause. So from what we hear, the term plantation goes back to the English language, or to and the term first appeared in the 1580s. So as you can see, during the time of indentured servitude, it's all around the same time that so-called plantations in the English vernacular came into existence. Give me 1 second, get some water. Don't forget, brothers and sisters, like, share, subscribe to the live. Don't forget to hit the like, share, subscribe button, and comment below. Let me know what you think so far. Let me know what you have done so far on your journey in regards to the information you've learned thus far. Alright, so it says, by the 1710s, the word was also being used to describe large farms where cash crop goods were produced, typically in tropical regions. The first plantations were established during the Edwardian conquest of Wales and the plantations of Ireland by the English crown. Alright, so let's repeat that. It says the first plantations were established during the Edwardian conquest of Wales. Let's see when that was. Alright, so that was between 1277 and 1283. Alright, that was right before what we can say the Donus Conditionalibus, alright, which was done, I think, in 1290. Alright, so it says, in Wales, King Edward I of England began a policy of constructing a chain of fortifications and castles in North Wales to control the native Welsh population. The Welsh were only permitted to enter the fortifications and castles unarmed during the day and were forbidden from trading. In Ireland, during the Tudor and Stuart eras, the English crown initiated a large-scale colonization of Ireland, in particular the province of Ulster, with Protestant settlers from Great Britain. These plantations led to the demography of Ireland becoming permanently altered creating a new Protestant ascendancy which would dominate Irish society for the next few centuries. Pause. So, as we can see, the history of plantations are tied back to the Plantagenet dynasty. King Edward I. King Edward I is from the Plantagenet family. So the Plantagenets are the ones who are, and let's say the creators of the plantations. All right, so we have to give them their credit in regards to this. And we're not saying all plantations were bad, and we're not saying plantations are good, but we have to recognize it where it's coming from. And then it's telling you that the plantations themselves were transferred more so in a sense when they were underneath the Tudor dynasty, the Tudors and the Stuarts, when they conquered, let's just say when they conquered Ireland, because that's what they did. And remember, all of them are operating underneath the auspices of the Roman Catholic Church to get into Ireland. So they're utilizing the English to get into Ireland. The English are actually descendants of the Gaels or the Angles. All right. So they are innocent, but they don't actually get away from, the consequence of their actions as well. But once again, the Stuart and Tudor dynasty are those the contributors of the reason why the Irish are in plantations. All right. And it says, in North America during the period of European colonization in the early modern period, several plantations were established by English settlers, including in Virginia, Rhode Island, and elsewhere throughout the 13 colonies. Other European colonial powers used the plantation method of colonization as well, though not to the extent of the English settlers. All right. Read a little bit about the Welsh. It says, starting in the reign of King Edward I of England, the English crown began a policy of castle building and settlement building in Wales to control the population and strategically surround the newly conquered kingdom of Gwynedd. Most of these castles were built with an integrated fortified town, which was designed to be provisioned from safer territories and hold out against Welsh attacks, an idea that the Normans had developed for the Bastards of Gascony. Let's see. This is where we want to get to Ireland. Ireland. The plantations of Ireland occurred in the 16th and 17th centuries and involved the English crown confiscating lands owned by the Irish people, starting in the 1550s with Queen Mary I, who was Catholic, with British Catholic settlers. Later, plantations involved redistributing them to the Protestant settlers from Great Britain. Though there had been periodic immigration from Great Britain to Ireland since the Anglo-Norman invasion, these immigrants had largely assimilated into Irish culture or were driven off from what little land they controlled by the 15th century, and the direct area controlled by the English crown has shrunk mostly to an area known as the Pale. All right, so pause. So during the time of the plantations of Ireland happening between the 16th and 17th century, so we're going to say this is the 1500s and the 1600s. So this is all around the time what we call the Age of Discovery. This is around during the time of Age of Discovery. 1485, the Plantagenet dynasty fell through the War of the Roses. And now the Tudors and Stuarts are in position. And if it said 1550 through Queen Mary I, who was a Roman Catholic. So like I said, Roman Catholics came in, even more enforcing their will to get into Ireland. They got into Ireland and they forced them underneath indentured servitude, put them in the plantations. And what they had to do was kick them out, because plantation means to colonize. So they colonized Ireland with folks who they came, of course they say it came from England and Scotland and stuff like that, but these were the people who they wanted who had the Roman Catholic influence. That's who they wanted over there. All right. So it says, beginning in the 1540s, the Tudor conquest of Ireland began, and roughly a decade later, the first English plantations were established by British settlers on Irish soil. So the English plantations, so remember, plantations means a colony of those who come from their motherland. So that means, the natives of England or the British, the natives of England, or we can say Great Britain, so that's Scotland and England and Wales, whatever, were now colonizing Ireland underneath the Tudors. All right, they're now colonizing Ireland underneath the Tudors. So the next wave of plantation. Oh, I didn't finish reading. Excuse me. So these plantations began during the reign of Queen Mary I of England in the counties of Louth and Offaly. However, these efforts at establishing plantations largely failed due to attacks from the local Irish clans. The next wave of plantations began during the reign of Queen Elizabeth I of England and were spearheaded by the West Countrymen. Elizabeth's policy in Ireland was to grant land to prospective planters and prevent the Irish from giving Spain a base from which to attack England. All right, so remember, because they all was fighting at this time, the various kingdoms were all fighting each other. So, and as they say, they were afraid that Ireland was going to allow Spain, because remember, they're descendants of the original founders of Ireland. They say come from Spain, or the Milesians, who come from that territory, what they was known as ancient Iberian, but these technically, in this sense, were actually Berbers. They're all Berbers, but they were afraid that because they had a historical connection, that they were going to probably allow Spain come in to set up shop in Ireland to be able to attack the English, all right, or Rome from that direction, all right. The plantations of Ulster began in the 1610s during the reign of James I. Following their defeat in the 9-year war, many rebel Ulster lords fled Ireland and their lands were confiscated. This was the biggest and most successful of the plantations and comprised most of the province of Ulster. While the province was mainly Irish-speaking and Catholic, the new settlers were required to be English-speaking and Protestant, and most coming from England and Scotland. This created a distinct Ulster Protestant community. Pause. So this is where a lot of the transitioning from Gaelic Ireland was taking place. It was just literally just changing over. They was getting rid of the original descendants of Gaelic Ireland, and now they had to start taking on their English identity. All right, either by choice or by the sword. So it was easy for many, as you can see, family who's still here today. You can see it was better for you to just do it by choice, because if you did it by the sword, it wasn't going to be in your favor. And then some of us, like I said, were on that side already. So that's what I'm saying. We're just mixed up people. We're just trying to get to the bottom of the confusion. So therefore, we're not repeating this same tirade and family feud that only is going to solve itself once somebody decide, like say, enough is enough and stop fighting for it. All right, so North America, beginning in the 15th century with the voyages of Christopher Columbus, various European colonial powers established colonies in the Americas. The Portuguese introduced sugar plantations in the Caribbean in the 1550s. England's efforts at colonization primarily focused on North America, where the first English plantation was established in 1607 at Jamestown. Over the next century, more English plantations will be established along the eastern seaboard, which collectively came to be known as the 13 American colonies, consisting of New England, Middle and Southern colonies. Other European colonial powers used the plantation method of colonization as well, though not to the extent of the English settlers. All right, now knowing from what we just read already, that these colonies or these plantations only got their start going back to Great Britain, when Great Britain first did it in the Edwardian era via King Edward I, when he colonized or set up the plantations for the Welsh. And then it was done again to the Irish when the Tudors and the Stuarts came into power and did their conquest to Ireland and set up plantations there. And then now what they're doing is they're sending folks from off of these territories, especially the Irish, and sending them to the plantations in the Americas. And they're not only sending the Irish, but they're sending the Scottish as well as the English. And how they're getting there and who all of them are there, that's for probably a different video. But we're seeing based off of the indentured servitudes, that's who most likely the people who are there, those indentured servants. So we're not even talking about those who are kidnapped and placed over there yet. We're just only talking about those who are underneath these indentured indentured contracts, all right, who have been working on the plantations. All right, so it says, I ain't gonna read the rest of this because you can read this on your own. All right, so let's go to the next one, the plantations of Ireland. All right, so so now we know what the plantations are, but we need to know a little bit more about the plantations of Ireland, because plantations of Ireland is during a time of what? The indentured servitude, which transitioned into what we call chattel slavery. All right, so we at least have an idea what's going on and who's the parties at play. So it says plantations. In 16th and 17th century Ireland involved the confiscation of Irish-owned land by the English crown and the colonization of this land with settlers from Great Britain. The main plantations took place from the 1550s to the 1620s, the biggest of which was the plantation of Ulster. All right, like we were saying, this was a time where a lot of the plantations were pretty much becoming a big thing because of, now the Tudors and them were in power and stuff like that. And Stuarts. So the plantations led to the founding of many towns, massive demographic, cultural, economic changes in land ownership and the landscape, and also to centuries of ethnic and sectarian conflict. They created large communities with British and Protestant identities and a new Protestant elite. The plantations took place before and during the earliest British colonization of the Americas. All right, you hear that? Let's repeat that. It says the plantations took place before and during the earliest British colonization of Americas, and a group known as the West Countrymen were involved in both Irish and American colonization. So if this is the case, who do you think will be the main people they're going to be putting over here in the colonies first to work the colonies? The people who they was in war with. Who were they at war with? They were at war with the Irish. The Tudors, they did what? The Tudors and the Stuart, they went and on a conquest, invaded Ireland. And during this time, they're setting up plantations in Ireland and the Americas. So who do you think they were sending on those freaking boats, on those ships to the Americas to be on the plantations? Not anyone from Africa at this time. No. Why would they go there when they could just use the people who, once again, it's in a territory who they was warring with? That's who they were sending to the colonies of the Americas. That's what the ultimate purpose of this video or this live is, to kind of get you to understand, especially when you're understanding the history of the plantation. Because many folk, brothers and sisters, constantly keep talking about, when our ancestors worked on the plantations, well, who were your ancestors? Because the only people who should have been working on the plantations at this time, especially from Great Britain in the 16th, 17th century, were those who were there at war with. And that was those who was in the territory of what? Ireland. All right, so the Scottish, the English, as well as the Irish were the ones that they were sending over here to the plantations, but the majority of the people who was over here they sent first were the Irish. All right, let's continue. There had been small-scale immigration from Britain since the 12th century. After the Anglo-Norman invasion, by the 15th century, direct English control had shrunk to an area called the Pale. In the 1540s, the English Tudor conquest of Ireland began. The first plantations were in the 1550s during the reign of Queen Mary I and Louise, Queen's County, and Offaly, King's County. That's like King Offa. These plantations were based around existing frontier forts, but were largely unsuccessful due to fierce resistance from Irish clans, like we spoke of on last page. The next plantations were during the reign of Elizabeth I. In 1568, there was an attempt to establish a colony in Kerry, but it was destroyed by the Irish. In the 1570s, a privately funded plantation of East Ulster was attempted, but it also sparked conflict with the local Irish lord and ended in failure. So it sounds like a lot of the Irish had a lot to do with these uprisings, the upheavals in these plantations, like Bacon's Rebellion and all that. So things are you're starting to see a pattern here, brothers and sisters. Alright, the Munster plantation of the 1580s followed the Desmond rebellions. Businessmen were encouraged to invest in the scheme, and English colonists were settled on land confiscated from the defeated rebel lords. However, the settlements were scattered and attracted far fewer than planned. When the 9 Years' War broke out in the 1590s, most of these settlements were abandoned, although English settlers began to return following the war. The plantation of Ulster began in the 1610s during the reign of James I. Following their defeat in the 9 Years' War, many rebel Ulster lords fled Ireland, and their lands were confiscated. This was the biggest and the most successful of the plantations and comprised most of the province of Ulster. While Ulster was mainly Irish-speaking and Catholic, the new settlers were required to be English-speaking Protestants, with most families coming from the Scottish lowlands and northern England. This eventually created a distinct Ulster Protestant community. Alright, so like I said, because of what was going on, you couldn't speak Gaelic any longer. You couldn't speak, or what they call Irish. You couldn't speak Gaelic, and the English couldn't, if you was in Ireland, couldn't speak Gaelic. There were what's the word I'm thinking of? There were laws. I was looking for a different word, but law was just the quickest word I could think of that was put in place, especially for the English in Ireland and vice versa. Alright. The Ulster plantation was one cause of the 1641 Irish Rebellion, during which thousands of settlers were killed, expelled, or fled. After the Irish Catholics were defeated in the Cromwellian conquest of 1652, damn Cromwell, most remaining Catholic-owned land was confiscated and thousands of English soldiers settled in Ireland. Scottish settlement in Ulster resumed and intensified during the Scottish famine of the 1690s. By the 1720s, British Protestants were the majority in Ulster. All right, and there you have it right there in regards to the plantations of Ireland, and as well how they were tied to the beginning origins of the plantations here in so-called America. Do I really want to go into the background? Yeah, let me go to the early plantations, 1556, 1576. All right, so the first plantations of Ireland occurred during the Tudor conquest. The Dublin Castle administration intended to pacify and anglicise Irish territories controlled by the Crown and incorporate the Gaelic Irish aristocracy into the English-controlled Kingdom of Ireland by utilizing a policy of surrender and regrant. Pause, and it's good that I had to read this. All right, so the Irish became anglicized, and they became anglicized not on their own wants and merits, but because by force underneath the Tudors. The Tudors are operating underneath the auspices of who? The Roman Catholic Church, even though they broke away via Henry the 7th and 8th and whatever, as they try to say. But they still are underneath who created them, because I think this was right before the so-called Act of Supremacy. I had to take a look at that. But anywho, so that's what we see what's going on. So it was the Tudors that did this, and then they forced them to go underneath the policy which they call the surrender and regrant. So we need to see what the surrender and regrant is real quick, then we're going to come back. Alright, so the surrender and regrant. During the Tudor conquest of Ireland 1540 to 1603, surrender and regrant was the legal mechanism by which Irish clans were to be converted from a power structure rooted in clan and kin loyalties to the late feudal system underneath the English legal system. Pause. So we're not going to blame the English on this. We're going to blame the constituents who was operating, utilizing the rights and the prerogatives of the English people to do their bidding, which was still underneath the feudal system that was created by Rome, that was brought into England by who? Cousin William the Conqueror, when he was underneath the mindset thinking that he had the right to claim England, when in actuality he didn't have the right to claim England at all. And so when he brought in the feudal system, in this case the feudal system brought all the way down to the Tudors' time, and the Tudor brought it into Ireland, and they brought into Ireland, they usurped the Brehon law, or the Brehon law, or the Brehon, however you want to pronounce it, law system that was already there, which also was tied to the original system that was based off of the structure of the clan. And the clan system was rooted, like they say, off of kin loyalty. And we're going to talk a little bit about the clan and how the clans were set up based off of the ancient order, going all the way to time immemorial and before for the Irish. Because as we can see, many of you brothers and sisters here today, this is who you are. This is the reason why this information, or you tying up to having like your own little tribe or clan or word clique or however you want to call it, resonate with you so much, because you come from ancient time, or you have in your blood, this is the way your predecessors operated, and you just don't know because of no one truly came and explained it to you. But that's why I'm here. I'm here to explain all of this to you and show you the way back if you want to do it the right way. And it had to be done the way that the ancestors, as well as the Most High, orchestrated and ordained, because you can't go back to being your predecessors when they was acting lawless and, you know, just doing whatever the hell they wanted. All right, but enough of that. Let's continue. So like it says, so the policy of surrender or grant was to incorporate the clan chiefs into the English-controlled Kingdom of Ireland, and to guarantee their property under English common law as distinct from the traditional Irish Brehon law system. This strategy was the primary non-violent method for Crown officials in the Dublin Castle administration to subjugate Irish clan leaders during the conquest. It was an unanticipated consequence to be required to pay fealty in currency instead of trade labor or commodities. The process of surrender and regrant thus created new unfamiliar debt structures among the Irish, and these debts had social and political consequences. All right, so we're going to read a little bit more about that later down the road, but I just wanted to kind of get you an idea about surrender and regrant and how it came to be. All right. So I want to stay on topic, and, you know, I want to be on live too long with you guys tonight, you know, because I know you all got stuff to do, and, you know, I want to keep you too long. All right, I'm going to read this, okay. So the Lois and Offaly. Alright, so the second forum set up the trend for future English policy in Ireland. It was punitive commercial in nature, as it provided for the plantation of English settlers on lands confiscated following the suppression of rebellions. The first such scheme was the plantation of Kings County, now Offaly, in Queens County, now Lois, in 1556, naming them after the new Catholic monarchs Philip and Mary I, respectively. The new county towns were named Phillipstown, now Danningen, and Maryborough, now Port Louis. An Act of Counties of Lex and Offaly Act 1556 was passed, whereby the King and Queen's Majesties and the heirs and successors of the Queen be entitled to the counties of Lex, Slewmarge, Erie, Glenmurray, and Offaly, and for making the same country shire grounds. The act was repealed in 1962. This plantation initiated the colonial settlement pattern for extending English control in hostile regions. The Lex Offaly plantation also demonstrated to the Crown high cost of colonialism, leading them to encourage private financial participation in colonial ventures. All right, next. The O'More and O'Connor clans, which occupied the area, had traditionally raided the English-ruled Pale around Dublin. The Lord Deputy of Ireland, the Earl of Sussex, ordered that they be dispossessed and replaced with the English settlement. However, the plantation was not a great success. The O'Mores and O'Connors retreated to the hills and bogs and fought a local insurgency against the settlement for much of the following 40 years. In 1578, the English family subdued the displaced O'More clan by massacring most of their fine or ruling families at Mullingmast and Lowes. Having invited them there for peace talks, Rory O'More, the leader of the rebellion in the area, was hunted down and killed later that year. The ongoing violence meant that the authorities had difficulty in attracting people to settle in their new plantation. Settlement ended up clustered around a series of military fortifications. And I wanted to read that because it was talking about the O'More, or in this case, the Moors. All right, so Moors are also native to the territory what we call the British Isles, because you had Moors who were part of the Kingdom of England, part of the Kingdom of Ireland, part of the Kingdom of Scotland. Okay, once again, so you have Moors who are part of various different kingdoms. And like they say, you'll know who you are, what clan you were part of based off of your surname. So that's what we're going to now get into, which we call the Irish clans, to get to the end part of this lesson, Bill, brothers and sisters. So once again, for those of you who are just now getting time to stop by, you're going to have to listen to this from the beginning, because now I'm starting to get towards the end part of this, and this is the best part of it. So like they say, always save the best for last. And this is the reason why we keep telling you genealogy is the order of the day. You need to know who you are, where you come from, because your story is going to be very unique than the next man or woman. So everyone needs to know their story, because it's only a we if you know who I am, or if you know who you are. You can't say there's a we if you don't know me. All right, so Irish clans. Irish clans are traditional kinship groups sharing a common surname and heritage and existing in a lineage-based society originating prior to the 17th century. I repeat, let me start that again for those of you who didn't hear me. Irish clans are traditional kinship groups sharing a common surname and heritage and existing in a lineage-based society originating prior to the 17th century. Now, the 17th century is what years? It's the 1600s. So that means that the Irish clan system existed in the 1600s and before. That means it existed prior to the so-called transatlantic slave trade. That means it existed before the so-called indentured servitude era. That means it existed way before you and I came into existence. So therefore, this is the way you should be understanding, because in the 1600s, that's when you start falling into coming to the status that you are into today and having no idea and understanding who you are and where you come from. Because many of you have been led astray because you think you know who you are, but you have no idea if you have not traced yourself back to a common group. All right, so it says, a clan, or fine in Irish plural finte, included the chief and his patrilineal relatives. I repeat, it said included the chief and his patrilineal relatives. Patrilineal means father side. So the Irish clans are dealing with the father side, not the mother, the fathers. However, Irish clans also included unrelated clients of the chief. So you didn't have to be related to the chief. He can adopt you and brought you into the clan. These unrelated clients and their agnatic descendants were ineligible to be elected chief, but nonetheless assumed the name of the leading lineage as a show of allegiance. This is how many people came to have your family surname. is because our families, we brought people into the family, and you become part of that family by if we gave you the ability to have the family name, and the only ones who's actually able to be chief or head of the family, you had to be a true descendant of the chief or the head of that family. In that case, lineal descent, agnatic descent, patrilineal descent wise. Otherwise, or other than that, you really couldn't be in the head position. But you're still part of the family. You're still going to enjoy the fruits of the labor and all that of the family as a whole. So it's not like you ever getting left out and things of that nature. So beginning in the 8th century, various genealogical collections were compiled purporting to trace the ancestry of these clans. Pause. And this is another reason why I keep saying, like, why don't they talk about genealogy in the West? You know, we got, as we can see, these ancient kingdoms, they spoke about genealogy. They have record books of that. Why in the West do they no longer speak about that? People in their own household, families don't even have their genealogy or record books or anything. So it goes to let you know that we all aren't living the same reality. We all aren't moving the same direction. And clearly, if we don't have the same mindset, there's no way in the world we're going to the same destination. All right. So it says, among them are the genealogies in Rawlinson and B502, the Book of Ballymote, the Book of Lacan, the Liber More Nad Genealogic, compiled by Dublektuk Mock Frederick. I hope I said that right. And the Old Cleric Book of Genealogies. In all these cases, the genealogies listed state the agnatic descent of the chiefs and the chieftains, and not necessarily every member of the clan. At least one genetic study has concluded that while these genealogies appear fairly accurate back to the Middle Ages, they are unreliable before the 7th century. We don't need anything before the 7th century. Hell, because the court's only going to recognize to the 1189, which is considered time immemorial. Time immemorial, 1189, was underneath the reign of who? King Richard I from the Royal House of Plantagenet, the brother of who? John I, the signer of the 1215 Magna Carta, which anniversary is actually coming up here the 15th of this month. So we need to also pay attention to that and put that on our dial plate and start speaking more in regards to that, because without the Magna Carta, we don't have a foundation. Also, for those of you who are listening, here's a little treat. Did you know that the Irish has a Magna Carta too? The Magna Carta of Ireland that was passed in 1217. That it's still what? It's still in force. So the Magna Carta of Ireland is still in force. Now, who do you think have the rights to start bringing this back? The heirs. Why no one talking about this? Because it ain't them. It's not for them. All right. So let's go ahead and continue, because like I said, it only gets better. Hopefully, brothers and sisters, you have your surname, your family names, and your genealogy, your pedigree ready to go, because we're about to start getting to some good stuff. So the definition of clan. The Irish word clan is borrowing from the Latin planta. So clan means plant. All right, meaning a plant, an offshoot, offspring, a single child or children, by extension, race or descendants. For instance, the O'Daly family were poetically known as the Clan Dalig, from a remote ancestor called Dalig. This is why it's important, brothers and sisters, to have your genealogy, so that way you can know where your family come from. You want to know where you got your genetics from. You want to know why you think the way you think, you act the way you act, look the way that you look. You know, why you're predisposed to certain things. You know, why some information you just click and other information, you know, you probably don't get. Or you got to understand that this is programmed into you as time went on. Our ancestors, the way they done things, it just became you. It became into your blood. So it's your software. And that's why I'm saying the software hasn't changed, because you haven't changed. You just don't know how to operate yourself. It's like a computer. The software is all installed, but the user gets upset because it's a user error. The user don't know how to use it. So you yourself, you have the conscious, but you don't know how to use your body or the blood that's within you because no one taught you how to use it. So you're operating via user error all the time. All right. That's why you have to know what blood is in you. You have to know what's in you. It ain't about like, so all humans are the same. No, we're not all the same. We all need the same things, most likely, when it comes down to like food, water, oxygen, things of that nature. But there's certain little intricate things about us that make us all unique, which make us all special. But in this case, when it comes down to genealogy, these clans, their names and things like that determined something. It wasn't just because they just wanted to use that name because it sounded cool. It all meant something. Unfortunately, here in the West, we don't understand these things because we're lost. We have failed that far in our understanding of how this reality and how things are operated, especially when it comes down to language. All right. So it says, the clan was used in the later Middle Ages to form a plural for surnames, beginning with Mac, meaning son of. For example, Clan Cartech meant the man of the McCarthy family, and Clan Subney meant the man of McSweeney family. Clan was also used to denote a subgroup within a wider within a wider surname. And remember, surname means free name. The descendants of a recent common ancestor, such as the Clan Oldeboy or the O'Neills of Clandeboy, whose ancestor was Old Boyd, who died in 1298. I think I pronounced that wrong, but forgive me. Such a clan, if sufficiently closely related, could have common interest in land ownership, but any political power wielded by their chief was territorially based. From ancient times, Irish society was organized around traditional kinship groups or clans. These clans traced their origins to larger pre-surname population groupings or clans such as the O'Brien and Connick, the Ignacta and Dalgickas in Munster, the O'Neills in Ulster, the Ferdomanin in Leinster. Within these larger groupings, there tended to be one set division who do war and politics became more powerful than others for a period of time, and the leaders of some were accorded the status of royalty in Gaelic Ireland. Some of the more important septs to achieve this power were O'Connor and Connick, McCarthy of Desmond, and O'Brien of Thomond in Munster, O'Neill in Ulster, and MacMore of Kavanagh in Leinster. The largely symbolic role of High King of Ireland tended to rotate among the leaders of these royal clans. The larger, more important clans were led by a Taoiseach or chief who had the status of royalty, and the smaller and more dependent clans were led by chieftains. Under Brehon law, the leaders of Irish clans were appointed by their kinsmen as custodians of the clan and were responsible for maintaining and protecting their clan and its property. Pause. So like for instance, your family or the clan you come from are going to pick who's going to be the chief, who's going to be a leader. So what's going on now today, you got strangers picking who's going to lead the people. The people themselves should all technically be related by blood. That's how historically kingdoms and things work. Same as we reading right now in clans from the Irish. These are all people who are related, or they have their allegiance to that particular patriarch. All right, it's going to have to return back to that because people follow who they respect. Trying to force people to follow folks who they don't respect is going to cause problems, and it has been causing problems. All right, so let's continue. The clan system formed the basis of society up to the 17th century. So why did it change? If the clan system worked all the way up until the 17th century, which is the 1600s, why did it change? I can tell you why. Because the conquest of Ireland. Because of the Tudors and the Stuarts when they invaded Ireland. They broke all of that down and they sent them to the colonies. And what I wanted to get to, gotta read the rest of that. The tribes, because the tribes themselves are tied to the clans. So you have the tribes of the Crewton, you have the tribes of Aaron, and it shows you the names of the families who are tied to those specific tribes. So like when folks talk about the Bible, the biblical tribes and stuff like that, all of that is fake. These are the true tribes and stuff that they were talking about. You have the tribes of the Domini or the Lygian. These are the families that's underneath there. Alright. And my favorite one, the most important, because I always told you I'm what? I'm an angel, or in this case, angels. And I already explained based off of when we read from the Irish preserved in the Bible and pyramids, and then also too the Irish origin of civilization, and then also too the Irish what's the other one, the one by Michael Tsarion, I can't remember the name of it, but once again they all say the same thing. They all tie to what I'm saying in regards to who we are. And I'm glad to know that from my family side, from my mother's father, who was my grandfather, so her patrilineal side, so it was actually in a proper order of succession, the way how it's supposed to be done. My grandfather, his name is Hart, or Wilford Hart, or Wilford Tony Hart, and that means he's an O Hart, and I was able to trace his family all the way back to Alabama, where the Irish had a great large history in regards to that territory. All right, and then now knowing that the Old Harts are tied to the kings and the princess of Tara, going back to the descendants of Harriman, and who is the son of King Melisius, who married Queen Skoda. So me understanding my history to be able to tie in those pieces is actually a very beautiful thing. All right, but like I told you, we're the Angles, and the Angles come from the Gales. So the Angles, who they call the Anglos, is a misappropriation in regards to the way who they truly are. It is actually the Angles. So it's not Angles, it's the Angles. And the Gales, in this case, are the Irish. And we all know that the English original stock, or what makes the English, is their Irish blood. All right, so let's go ahead and read the tribes of the Gales. So it said, according to the O'Reilly's doctrine, the Gales, or Gaels, were the fourth and the final wave of the Celtic settlement in Ireland, which took place during the 1st century BC. In line with this, according to Kearney, from them descended the following Irish tribes. Although it is not possible to prove O'Reilly's history of the 4 Celtic invasions of Ireland, or that the Gaels or the Gaels were the 4th of these invasions, or that the following Irish tribes descended from them, according to historian Sean Duffy, with the exception of the clan Choman, Senio, Lochair, and Muintir Tadigan. The existence of all the following Irish tribes in around the 7th century is supported by the literature of the time that came to Ireland with Christianity. All right, so this is what they're utilizing to coincide with what they're saying in regards to what I'm about to read, in regards to who are the tribes of the Gaels, based off of your surname, which ties you to the clan you come from. All right, so I need to get some more likes up in here, brothers and sisters, because you don't hear this information anywhere else. Come on, help me get through the algorithm. Help me get this information out there more. Like I said, help me be able to get my voice out there to the world as a whole, especially those within the British American colonies who are actually the descendants of those who were left here as indentured servants, who couldn't afford to tie their way back home because they couldn't afford it. And now that we live in a day and a time where now that the world is now open for more people to be able to travel and to go to different places, only way for folks to know who they are and to be able to go to their true ancestral home, who have been stuck here for over 400 years, is by them knowing who they are via their genealogy. And the only way for me to be able to help get this message out there, I need your help. I need your help by hitting the like button. Help get those hearts up there. Helping me break through the algorithm. Going to the YouTube channel. Put down the comments on there. Giving me some engagement. Anything that you do right now is going to help me in this intellectual movement to help save my people, to bring them back up to the proper state of mind. And the only way for you to help me bring them back to the proper state of mind is by your contribution. And your contribution today will be able to help set the tone and the pace to which you're going to see via prophecy. Because right now, brothers and sisters, you yourself don't realize it, but this is prophecy taking place whether you know it or not. Yes, this is prophecy. This is what all of you brothers and sisters have been waiting for. This is what your great good book has been telling you about, even though it's been shrouded in secrecy and mystery that you didn't really understand about. But they told you there was going to be a teacher who's going to be teaching from his heart, who's going to be the teacher of righteousness, who is going to return to come and do what? To come and help and bring those people who were sent to the colonies, who lost their true status, and bring them back home, bring them back to full life. And once again, you can help me. You can be part of that. You are part of that because you hear my voice and you are here on this live right now. And I promise you that after you end this live today, you're going to rest assured and you're going to have the thought and the seeds planted in your mind, and you're going to start thinking and wonder like, wow, I've never heard of information like that before, but it blew my mind and it feels real. It's resonating with me. I'm buzzing. I'm vibrating. You know, I can't sleep. It seems like I need to do some more research. I need to go talk to somebody about this because this is mind blowing. This sounds like something that's like a fairy tale, but not just a fairy tale that you could talk about, but this is actually a fairy tale that you can live and believe, because you can actually see it and you can actually touch it and you can actually consume it because it's real. It's right here. It's not like it didn't go anywhere. You're right here seeing it in full real life. All right, so let me go ahead and get to the final part of this, and this is regarding who the Gales are based off of their surname, who they are today, brothers and sisters. So don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel. And once again, you are here listening to your humble, noble brother, Deontay Belmont, from the illustrious noble house of Belmont, as well as the house of Hart. All right, so it says the North Gales, the Connaught, the O'Briens. Their chiefly family was Gaelic. The Shuel Murdic, which anglicized in Silmurry, and which included a number of important families, including the O'Connors, the O'Conordon, the O'Connor Sligo, the Malones, the Mulconrys, the McShanleys, the McGoverns, the McClantys, the O'Rourkes, the O'Reillys, the O'Byrnes, the O'Sheridans, the O'Carrys, the O'Flanagans, the O'Crowleys, the McDermotts, the McDonoughs, the O'Mothervilles, the McJerrickys, the O'Flahertys. These are all the North Gales, brothers and sisters. Gaels. This is who these people are based off the surname. And then you have the Ufircrac, I think that's how you pronounce that, or the Ufircrac, which means the northern. Their main chiefs were the O'Dowds, but other chiefly families included the O'Finnegans, the O'Keefes, the O'Bolins, the O'Kearneys, the O'Quigleys. You have the Ufircrac, which means the southern. Their main chiefs were the O'Shagnesseys, but other chiefly families were the O'Haines, the O'Haney, or the Hines, the O'Clerys, the O'Donnells, the O'Hoolahans, which in some places became Holland and Nolan, and also the O'Scanlans. Then you have the O'Neills, and this is where Shaquille O'Neal folks come from, brothers and sisters. So once again, if you don't understand what I'm talking about, but yes, Shaquille O'Neal, this is his lineage. He is a Gael, aka he is an Ale. He is one of those who come from Ireland based off his blood lineal descent. And his name, Neil, means what? Champion. How many championships do Shaquille O'Neal has? Quite a few. How many businesses do Shaquille O'Neal own? Quite a few. How rich is Shaquille O'Neal? Very rich. All right, so let's continue. So there's no such thing as coincidences once you know. All right, so you had the senior Eogan. The chiefly family was the O'Neill dynasty, but also included the McLaughlins, the O'Branigans, the O'Reillys of Kerry, the McMartins of Tyrone, the O'Cahans, the McLaughlins, the Lamonts, the McSorleys, the McNeils, the McEwens, the McQueens, the McSwins, the McSweeneys of Ireland, O'Cranes, the Cranes, the Crahans, the Creegans, the O'Donnellys, the O'Gehardys, the O'Gormleys, the O'Hagans, the O'Beolans, the Senil Cano. Their main chiefs were the O'Donnell dynasty of Tyrconnell, or Tyrconnell, Connell, but also included the O'Cannons. So the O'Cannons, or the O'Cannons, the O'Moldonis, O'Molderies, the O'Freels, the O'Boyles, the O'Cullens, and the O'Dohertys. Senil Carabry, their main chiefs was the O'Briens. And then next we have the Southern O'Neills. The Clan Coleman, their main chiefs were the O'Malligans, who were later known as the McLaughlins of Meath. Then you have Senil Fiacach, their main chiefs were the MacGeogheghans, I hope I pronounced that right, or the O'Malloys. The Senil Laguerres, their main chiefs were the O'Quinlans. The Fertithba, their main chiefs were the O'Caharneys, the O'Dallys, the McAuleys, the McCarrans, the O'Brianas, and the O'Shields. The Mointir Tagan, their chiefs were the O'Carneys, the O'Kearneys, also known as the Foxes, or the Shionach, and Matfindi. It's always, like I said, the best for last, in this case because it ties to me. The 4 tribes of Tara. The 4 tribes of Tara ties to the princes of Tara, to the kings of Tara. Alright? And the 4 tribes of Tara goes to the 4 families. And one of the 4 families are who I'm a descendant of, which is the O'Harts. Alright, so this is who I descend from, is the O'Harts, from my grandfather, which is my mother's father, whose name is Wilford Hart. He's very short too. He was like 5'5", 5'6". Short man. I miss him. And he had a lot of children too. A lot of them. A lot of grandkids as well. Alright. And so as we can see, so the O'Harts are the tribes of Gales. This is how you make it so much easier, brothers and sisters. This is how you remove all of that extra jargon and conversation that you don't even need to have with people when you're able to do the great work. This easy, this simple. And I'm not even talking about stopping in the 1800s where they call it the 1865 brick wall. No, you got to go beyond that. That's once you break the 1865 brick wall to get to the 1700s to 1600s. Once you get to that time frame, you can rest assured that what name they had at that time, that's your folks. But because of the false narrative of people thinking that slave owners gave them their names, they have to break out of that brick wall era first to them be able to accept information of this magnitude, which I'm showing you here today. So I don't have to try to convince you. The goal is not to convince you. The goal is to try to show you clarity based off of my works that I've done. Because if you see yourself within me, just like I see myself within you, then that means you can walk the same direction that I'm walking and achieve the same results. So what I'm saying is, if you walk the same path in regards to your genealogy, you should arrive in the same destination, especially if you have the same surname, going back to the same territories that I have, which goes back to the British Isles, which encompasses the Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England. Alright? So with that being said, brothers and sisters, I'm going to go to House of Names to show you Hart, to start wrapping this on up. Hart, history, family crest, coat of arms. etymology of Hart, that was originally written in Gaelic. So letting you know that the Hart family, that the Gaels were Gaelic. Specifically, the family claimed descent through Hart Ifenhair, who was number 81 on the line of Harriman, and the son of the monarch Khan of the 100 Battles. He was at times called the Solitary, as he was the only one of his father's sons that survived. His two brothers, Kanla, Rud, and Kriana, having been slain by their uncles. His grief was so strong that in some writings he was referred to as Art the Melancholy, O Hart. The name literally means a bear, a stone, noble, great, generous, hardness. Ancient origins of Ireland. According to Irish tradition, the ancient kings of Ireland were the descendants of King Milesius of Spain. Milesius was the grandson of Briagan, conqueror of Galicia, Andalusia, Murcia, Castile, and Portugal, who was also called Brigas or Brian. Milesius achieved outstanding military success in Egypt and was given Skoda, the pharaoh's daughter, in marriage. When Spain underwent a 26-year famine, Milesius sent his uncle Ith to seek out new homeland in accordance with the ancient prophecy. After Ith discovered Ireland, only to be murdered by the resident Tuath de Danann, his son Leged brought his body home to Spain. Alright, and I wanted to show you something else. Oh, and just to show you real quick, so this is, I just told you about the Irish. We're all talking about the Irish. Now he's in America. And this is coming from the Irish Central. And it said they hunted down Irish runways like animals in colonial America. All right. So we're going to read this advertisement, and it's coming from the Pennsylvania Gazette, and how they describe a couple Irishmen, so that way you can kind of know like who you are or how they were described and how this information could pertain to you. All right, so we're going to read just the first one, the one August 16th, 1750. And it says, runaway on the 12th instant from Joseph Jackson of London Grove, Chester County, an Irish servant man named William Farrell, of middle stature and brown complexion, had on when he went away a striped flannel jacket, a brown sailor jacket, a pair of coarse trousers, striped drawers, a felt hat, and a check shirt, his hair cut off. Likewise he ran away the aforesaid servant, another Irish servant man named Thomas Collard, who belonged to Samuel Ramsey of Londonderry in the said county, of a dark complexion and a pock mark, had on a green double-breast jacket with clear buttons and red lining, black breeches, black wig, his other clothes not certainly known. Whoever takes up and secures the said servants, so that their masters may have them again, shall have £6 reward for both, or £3 for either, and reasonable charges paid by Joseph Jackson or Samuel Ramsey. And that's coming from the Pennsylvania Gazette, August 16th, 1750. So we just read about indentured servants or indentured servitude, how it wasn't slavery, but it was similar to slavery. Indentured servitude, why? Because indentured servants were underneath a contract, which is a legal contract, which in this case can be brought into a court, a proper jurisdiction, who can actually hear the case or hear the matter, compared to slaves who had no rights, nothing, none of that matter or that nature. And showing you from from this advertisement that there were people who you will constitute or call today black people who are actually Irish, who was separated from those who were considered Negro slaves. So there were multiple different statuses here in the so-called territory that you call America during this time, with people who all looked the same, but yet they all would be underneath different identities or statuses based off of who they are and what they were underneath it for. So we're going to also go to, because now you see this Irish people, indentured servitude originally started because of the English occupying the Welsh in the 1550s, whatnot, if I'm not mistaken. Let me see. Excuse me, that was plantation. My bad. Plantations. So plantations started back in the 1550s here, and based off of Queen Elizabeth I, but going all the way back to the Edwardian era by King Edward I, when he placed plantations or colonies in Wales, and then the Tudors and the Stuarts, via their conquest, they placed colonies and plantations in Ireland, and from there they took those plantations from Ireland and transplanted them over here in the territory you call America. But they were utilizing it based off the system that they had started here in Ireland in this case. So like it says, the plantations of Ireland occurred in the 16th and 17th centuries and involved the English crown confiscating lands owned by the Irish people, starting in the 1550s with Queen Mary I, who was Catholic, with British Catholic settlers. Later, plantations involved redistributing them to Protestant settlers from Great Britain. All right. So plantations of Ireland started in the 16th, 17th century. This article, 17 or advertisement 1750. So this the 17th century. Excuse me. This the 18th century. So 16th, 17th century. All right, I think I'm still connected. All right, so now to wrap this on up. Because I know it's inside here. All right, so yeah, so here we go. So like I said, so the plantations of Ireland. The plantations took place before and during the earliest British colonization of the Americas, and a group known as the West Countrymen were involved in both Irish and American colonization. So that means that the first people who they were utilizing to send over here to the so-called colonies or the plantations in America were the Irish. That means that those people who they so-called said, here go the live messing up again, who built America during this time was those who came from the British Isles. And they didn't just send the so-called Irish to the colonies. It was the Scottish as well as the English. All right. And so this is where the understanding and idea of plantations come from. They come from the Plantagenet dynasty underneath King Edward I. And it passed all the way down to the Tudors and the Stuarts, who utilized it over here in so-called America, brothers and sisters. All right, so like background, it says Edmund Spencer wrote of the Old English. And the Old English, this is who the Old English people are. The Old English people are the Norman Irish, or what they call Hibernal Normans. So the Old English people are actually Irish Normans. That's who the Old English are. So it says the Old English had integrated into the Irish society. Edmund Spencer wrote the Old English, they are more sharply to be chastised and reformed, for they are more stubborn and disobedient to the law and government than the Irish. English discourse on Ireland largely viewed the Gaelic Irish outside the Pale as savages and compared them with the Native Americans in 1580. All right, so the Gaelic Irish, they said the Gaelic Irish outside the Pale was considered compared to the Native Americans in the 1580s. Now, for those of you who've done the research, know that the Algonquin Indians, or those who they said that Indians in the territory we call Ohio, Virginia, Canada areas, all that jazz, who's known underneath the Algonquin culture, are actually Irish. So it makes perfect sense. So they kind of throwing you some little kind of, some tidbit gems within the language. You got to read between the lines. You got to know what you're looking at. That's because they are one and the same. That's why the Irish was the first ones that they sent over there to the colony to colonize America, because they were already over here in America. But we ain't gonna talk about that right now. All right, so here we go again. It says Dr. Hiram Morgan has stated that the plantations of Munster, starting with St. Leger, were the prototype for the American colonies. The joint stock Irish model became the model for the Virginia Company. Do you hear this, brothers and sisters? The Irish became the model for how everything was operating via the colonies here in America. Those were the people who they sent to the so-called colonies, the plantations to work. Those were the melanated people who they sent to the plantations to work, brothers and sisters. There wasn't nobody from so-called Africa. It was the Irish, the melanated Irish, or the melanated people from the British Isles. They sent over there. It says there was an enterprising capitalist element to the Munster plantations. Privateers and the enterprising public could buy land in Munster at pennies an acre as undertakers, sometimes backed by private investors. Sir Walter Raleigh owned large estates in Munster and harvested the forest around his estate to make tobacco pipes and wine barrels. Although his company proved unprofitable, however, other investors made a fortune off the plantations. Businessman Robert Payne advocated for settlers to come to the Munster colonies. He bought land holdings in Munster for his venture, recruiting 25 business partners and partnering with industrialist Francis Willoughby. Willoughby was a sleeping partner in a project aimed at establishing an ironworks in the Munster colonies. Daniel Gookin, a Munster colonist, sold his lands in Carrigaline and his company in Munster to the ultimate capitalist colonialists of the period, the newly created Richard Boyle, 1st Earl of Cork. He then partnered with another Munster colonist, Captain William Noose, to invest in the newly formed Virginia Company and helped establish the colony of Jamestown in North America. So that's what I'm telling you. They were utilizing the people. Like I said, you're going to use your workers who you already got. It's like starting a new company in a different part of the country. And the best people who you're going to have get that company started are those who are already working for the one company that you have in the territory you're already in. All right, so it says in Ulster, The Cromwellian period eliminated those native landowners who had survived the Ulster plantation. In Munster and Leinster, the mass confiscation of Catholic-owned land after the Cromwellian conquest of Ireland meant that English Protestants acquired almost all of the land holdings for the first time in these territories, and they weren't really so-called full English. These were Roman Catholics. Under the Cromwellian regime, some 12,000 Irish people were sold into indentured servitude. So where do you think these 12,000 Irish indentured servitudes went? They went to the Caribbean and North American colonies. So those are those so-called people who you said are so-called slaves, brothers and sisters. It was those Irish, and we ain't talking about so-called no recessive. We're talking about dark skin. All right. Dark skin, brown skin, however you want to slice and dice it. They'll be just like this: that Irish servant man named William Farrell of middle stature and brown complexion, or the Irish servant Thomas Collard being of a dark complexion, one or the other. So it says another 34,000 Irish Catholics went into exile on the continent, mostly in the Catholic countries of France or Spain. And other than that, brothers and sisters, there you have it. That is my build for tonight. For those of you who just now get an opportunity to hear this information for the first time, I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully this was something that sparked your enthusiasm. Hopefully it brings you back to further future builds, because we are looking for our long lost kinfolk within the British American colonies, who, based off of the research I've been showing you today thus far, are still here, who don't know who they are, and it's only up to them to accept who they are via genealogy to be able to start the path on bringing themselves back home. So with that being said, thank you once again. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the channel. With that being said, I am out. Peace.